Welcome to this session of Xcode in the Playground. We're going to be looking at variables and data types today. So the main learning objectives will be declaring a variable, what is the difference between a let and a VAR declaration, and also the different data types that Xcode uses. Now these data types will be important because they help you declare variables and the types of data that will be contained within these variables. So let's get underway and open up Xcode Playground. Now once again we're going to start with a blank document and we're going to call the project data type. So the first thing I'm going to do is just remove out the variable declaration there, and just above import UIkit I'm just going to put developer and then you can put your name afterwards. Now the first thing we want to be able to do is declare a variable. So I'm just going to put in a developer comment again. Now I use these developer comments to section up my code to make it easier for other programmers to come in and have a look. So I do recommend, especially if you're doing assignments for university or for high school, that you use developer comments throughout your code. In commercial programming, there'll be guidelines of how and what you need to do, depending on the software house that you work for. So when declaring a variable, we can actually declare a var, and then we can create the variable name. So I'm going to put in first name. So I've applied a developer naming convention here called lower Camel Case. So let's have a look at that. So lower Camel Case uses the principle that the first word starts with the first character with a lowercase letter. Then every word following this will start with a capital. We don't use spaces or underscores. And you notice we have a lower word and then a hump and then a hump, and that's where it's got its name from, because people think it is a camel. If there was more words to follow, they will be concatenated together starting with a capital letter. This is the preferred convention used by programmers when writing in Xcode. Now once I've declared the variable var and given the container a name, first name, we can then set its data type. In this case, because it's going to hold text or characters, we know it's a string. So string means a string of characters. So then we can let that equal something, and we have to place strings in quotes, either single or double quotes. I prefer to use double quotes. And then you can place your first name there. Now what we're doing here is declaring a container space called first name, and it's of type string. So the data that's going to be placed into first name will be of string. We can also declare and assign later. So we can go var last name, and that can be of data type string. And then later on in our program, we can get the last name or assign the last name to the variable, where last name is equal to Marsden. Now if we want to see the contents of a variable, we can just print that or call the variable name. So when I call last name and print what's inside of that, if we run the program down the bottom here and make it automatically run, you can see there are two outputs that are occurring. In our inspector panel on the right, you can see that the first name has had Leon placed into it. You'll notice with the declaring of the var last name, nothing has been placed into it, but the memory space has been allocated for last name. We can then assign Marsden to last name. You can see in the inspector that that's now inside this variable. And then we can print out last name. So in inspector, you can see Marsden \n. \n is a return carriage. And because we're using a print statement, it always places a \n at the end of this return carriage. So in our output window down the bottom, we can see Marsden. If we want to see the contents of first name, we can also go print first name. When the program runs, you can see that Leon's in there. In our output window down the bottom, you can see Leon, because it's printing out what's in first name. What is inside first name? It's Leon. If we want to do a quick concatenation, which means putting these together and have first name, last name, with print bracket full name, and then we can use an escape character, which is the \, and then call the variable name. So first name, And then we can use the same backslash and bracket to call last name. And close the bracket. You can see in the Spectre window, it's got full name, colon, Leon space Marsden, because the space between here has been picked up. The escape character has allowed us to access the variable. The variable then returns the contents of what's inside of it. And the print statement will print this all out in one line. So we see down in the output area, full name, Leon Marsden. Okay, so let's have a look at some other data types. We can have strings. Strings hold text. So the nicest way to put this is text, which is equal to a string of char, which are characters. So Leon is a capital L with a lowercase e and a lowercase o and a lowercase n. Together it forms a string, so they're all linked together, but they're individual chars. Another data type we can use is an integer. So we can declare age, and then we can declare that as an integer, and we can make that equal to 18. So we know that this number 18 going in is an integer and not a real number like 18.0. An integer is only a whole number. Like 27, 59, and 72. So they're whole numbers, no decimals. If we want a decimal number, we can declare wage as a float. Now a float can use decimal numbers. So we can have like $12.50. We can have more decimal points as well if we wanted to. We can have the integer portion of the number and the decimal portion of the number. So when we output a float, print wage, you will see that the truncation occurs with the 0 missing on the end. This is a natural process done by all computers because the 0 doesn't exist, so it treats the float as 12.5. We would need to format that to 2 decimal points to have the 0 at the end, because the computer itself doesn't know that wage is actually currency, it just knows that at the moment it's 12.5. We can have another type of float, var, and let's call it pi. And we can make this a double, and that could be equal pi to say 10 decimal points. You can see there's a lot more decimal points to this, but the difference between float and pi, because float will take a 10 decimal pointed number as well, but the computer allocates more memory to doubles. So therefore it can take in larger numbers. So when I'm using numbers with lots of decimals or lots of integer parts, I would use double to ensure that it's got enough memory allocation to keep track of the result. Now the difference between integer, float, double and string is you can perform mathematical calculations on integers, floats and doubles, but you can't perform mathematical calculations on strings. You will have to cast that to a different data type. So take the contents of the char and turn it to integer, float, or double. But we'll cover that in a future tutorial. But just remember that you can only perform mathematical calculations on integers, floats, and doubles. You can't perform a mathematical calculation on a string. The last data type you'll use commonly within all programming languages is the Boolean. So a Boolean is 2 states. It's either going to be true or false. So we declare it as a bool, and that's either going to be true as a result. If we print out has cat, you'll see the result of true. You can see the result over here. The other state of a Boolean is true or false. Now it can't have any other state, so there is no shades of grey. There's no 1.5. It's either 0 or 1. On, off, true, false. So if I turn this to false, you can see that the output now becomes false. Now the last thing we need to look at in this tutorial is the difference between var and let. So if we go let GST, which is going to be an integer, equal to 10, because it's 10%, this declares GST as a constant. So GST will only be assigned one value. The difference between a VAR and a LET, a VAR could change. So hascat could change to true. So in summary, if the information is only going to be allocated once, use a LET. If the information is going to change in the variable, use a VAR. So in this session of Xcode in the Playground, we've looked at declaring variables. We've looked at the different data types, the difference between a LET declaration and a VAR declaration when creating variables. So I hope you found this tutorial useful. If you did, give it a like, subscribe to my YouTube channel. Also have a look around my YouTube channel for other useful programming tutorials. And I look forward to seeing you in the next edition of Xcode in the Playground.